Which Grand Theft Auto game could we consider the hardest in the franchise? Although the title and thumbnail of this video might have given it away, it's also not enough to just put one game under the spotlight and inspect it. Difficulty can be somewhat subjective when it comes to video games, and there's tons of factors that come into play. And it's really hard to look at this from an objective point of view. When browsing various forum threads that I've also asked this question over the years, a vast majority of people only go for 3 picks. GTA 3, the first game to ever shift to the 3D universe, and one that I can personally understand as to why people go for it. It was Rockstar trying to figure out their formula for the first time in a 3D setting, and mistakes in mission design are to be expected, like certain enemies that can quickly overpower you and blow your car in a few seconds, Saints Mark becoming a no-go zone after Salvatore's death, and generally every gang in the city hating and trying to erase you from existence with every chance they get after certain points in the storyline. And not to mention that the game didn't even have a pause menu map, meaning if you're playing for the first time and not pay much attention either, some missions will have you circle around the wrong island before you figure out where the mission actually takes place. So again, it's a valid choice. However, some of these issues were fixed in later re-releases of the game, like the definitive editions, which, if we were to take into account, it did actually fix some of the issues like the missing pause menu map and even implement a checkpoint system. Then we have GTA San Andreas, which is somewhat surprising to me, and it's usually paired with the argument of missions such as wrong side of the tracks and supply lines existing. But the first one is just due to poor mission design from the developers, and the other one might be from difficult controls of the RC plane, which I could understand, especially if you played it way back on the PS2, but that's really about it. And the third option, although not as popular, is the star of today's video, Grand Theft Auto Vice City Stories, the final entry in the 3D era that goes all the way back to 1984, before the events of every game that preceded it. But even VCS might not be as hard as some of the other games in the franchise. But the reasons as to why I picked it is because many people probably never played nor even care about the actual hardest game ever made. So we're gonna take a quick detour. And that would be the second expansion for the original GTA 1 called London 1961, a prequel to the other expansion called London 1969, two games that, like I've said, are meant to be an expansion to GTA 1, so basically DLCs. And if you're curious to find out more about these expansions, I have a separate video from a few months back where I talk about both of them at length. But the more important thing is, why would I pick London 1961 as the hardest GTA game? And why not the other one, 1969, or even the original GTA? Because frankly all three of them, with the addition of GTA 2, the last game of the 2D era, are all very difficult. And that's mostly to do with a mission design that was in its infancy. Therefore, they aren't up to today's standard, or even the standard GTA 3 set back in 2001. Some missions are as easy as get from point A to B and deliver a car, with the addition of very strict timers, for no reason, that are very tight even for someone who knows their way around these maps like the back of their hand. Oh, and speaking of maps, much like GTA 3, these games also didn't have a pause screen map. But even worse, unlike 3, these games didn't have a radar either. You'd only have these arrows that point in the general direction and don't take things like buildings or dead ends into account. So again, unless you know what you're doing beforehand, you're gonna have a challenging time playing these missions. But London 1961 especially has some of the tightest time windows from all of them. And not just one per mission, but multiple, turning it from very difficult to outright frustrating for, again, no reason. Then add the driving that takes place on the other side of the road, which takes some time to adjust to, but that might be just skill issue on my end. Tank controls, because this is the 2D era, and you get a recipe for one of the hardest GTA games ever made. So if London 1961 is the hardest, then why begin the video talking about Vice City Stories? Well, again, not many people have played it. In fact, there's tons of people that aren't even aware of these expansions existing in the first place. So the relatability factor kinda goes out the window for a lot of people. Plus, once Rockstar did figure out their stuff from GTA 3 onwards, it's not like difficulty disappeared completely. Hence why VCS is the topic of discussion. So where do we even begin? If I were to base this on just story missions alone, I think VCS still competes with other games in the franchise. Often when I see a video or article listing top 10 hardest GTA missions, you get the usuals like Wrong Side of the Tracks, Espresso to Go, Death Row, 3-Leaf Clover, even Flight School, but rarely do you ever see any missions from VCS, like Boomshine Blowout, Turn On, Tune In, Bug Out, Unfriendly Competition, Highwire, and a few others. I could probably make a top 10 with just VCS quite easily. But since some of these lists include missions from GTA 5 like Did Somebody Say Yoga, I question the validity of them. Then there's also the Empire Building System, a great minigame that I always have a lot of fun engaging with, and I've also talked about it before in a video I've referenced about 15 times now. It combines assets from Vice City with gang wars from San Andreas, and the result is amazing but not free of issues. We're all very familiar with the constant attacks that happen while you're just cruising around during free roam, and you have no choice but to traverse the entire map because they usually happen very far from your current location and defend them, or else you run the risk of losing them to rival gangs. But the constant attacks are only part of the issue. The other one comes from the constant death squads that are sent out to kill Vic at random times during free roam. The way they work is that the game takes the gang that hates you the most, which happens by taking over a lot of their empires, and then spawns a few of them in a vehicle close to you to make your life harder. This is similar to the hitmans that attack Tony during a short period of the Stone Island segment, where Mas Cipriani puts a contract on Tony's life. But those guys were usually pretty easy to deal with, whereas these gang members pack submachine guns. And here's where things go for the worst. You might be familiar with a bug that's part of this game, where NPCs have a really high fire rate when performing a drive-by, and that's the fault of the developers that somehow messed up the drive-by mechanics, but again only for NPCs. The fire rate of submachine guns is directly tied to the frame rate, with the game putting out 1 bullet per frame. Since VCS runs at 30 FPS both on PSP as well as the PS2, that results in NPCs firing at 30 bullets per second, which isn't just overpowered but outright broken. Thankfully, it works both ways, so friendly NPCs that are in a car with you can also use this insane fire rate on enemies to take them down in a matter of seconds. But when you're on your own being hunted down by a death squad, your life turns into a nightmare very quickly. And things get worse when you unlock the second island, because the Empire buildings on that one are mostly owned by the Sharks. And once you take over enough of their empires to where they hate you the most, prepare for the worst experience imaginable. Their death squads pull up in a Gang Rancher, which is a relatively fast car. And it's also packing 4 gang members, with 3 of them shooting you with MP5s. Now, doing some simple math, this means that you're being shot at with 90 MP5 bullets per second, and if they catch up to you, which isn't hard considering the speed of the Gang Rancher, you're basically being guaranteed a trip to the nearest hospital, unless you're willing to roll around the Vice City streets in a tank at all times. But at least this game allowed you to buy back your guns when wasted or busted, which is a great addition. Part of this is due to the developer's fault, as I'm sure Rockstar Leeds didn't intend for the player to face literal bullet rains every 5 minutes, or actually every 2 minutes, since I must have been attacked at least 10 times by these death squads when recording the footage, but I might be wrong. Thankfully, once you take over all 30 empires across the map, you're gonna have a peaceful time and the attacks will come to a full stop. But a sizable list of difficult missions and a game mechanic that's gonna interrupt your fun times during free roam isn't everything. I would also like to mention the increased amount of levels required for vehicle-related side missions, which I never understood. Not to mention the amount of side jobs is increased to the point that the 100% checklist of Vice City Stories is almost up to par with San Andreas, a game that has 2 extra cities and a much longer storyline. For some reason, Rockstar Leeds decided to increase the amount of levels required for these jobs from 12, which was the norm, to 15. It might not sound like a big increase, but the time it takes to deliver all patients in Paramedic, for example, does add up quite significantly. Not to mention that besides the side missions we're familiar with, they added a few more, like Air Rescue and Pyrocopter. 2 missions that give me goosebumps just thinking about them. If you've played VCS, you know what I'm talking about. There is, however, a checkpoint system that allows you to fail and continue at a later time every 5 levels. But realistically, most players do these jobs in one go, because playing them can sometimes be a chore if you're doing them for the 100% completion. They could have just kept them at 12 levels and offer a checkpoint every 4 levels instead, so there was no need to increase the level cap. All in all, I think it's safe to call Vice City Stories the hardest game, at least from the 3D era onwards. But generally, if you want to experience frustrating and hair-pulling levels of difficulty, I suggest trying out GTA London 1961. And if you want to do it in a way that's friendly to modern hardware and even has a few extra features, check out the Ready to Play project over on GTA forums. But I could be wrong, so I'd like to hear your opinions as well. Which GTA game that you've personally played do you consider the hardest in the franchise? Is it VCS when it comes to the 3D era, London 1961 from the 2D, or is it a completely different game? Let me know in the comment section down below. And while you're there, also leave a like. And of course, consider subscribing if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching.